Good morning. I have the very pleasure to host this panel. Just as an introduction, a couple of words. We live in a sort of a world of what I call three paradoxes of AI. The first paradox, which is what we have heard this morning. On one side, we have massive innovation happening, and we're saving the world, and all these kind of things. And I'm, very pleased to see what all AI is able to do, and I trust that, obviously. And even this afternoon, we have another panel on AI for good, which is an interesting thing. But at the same time, we want to regulate it. So if this is great, why do we need to regulate it? Why is there a reason for that? And what do we need to regulate? That's the first paradox. The second paradox is to some extent the first answer to the first is an answer to the first paradox, which is on one side we have talked again about the magic of AI solving all the world challenges, healthcare, environment, productivity, and so forth. But we haven't talked about the bad stuff from AI. And I don't want to be the bad guy, talking about the bad things, right? But we know there are a lot of issues and risks, etc., regarding the implementation of AI and how bad actors can use it and issues of bias and so forth. But there's a third paradox, which we'll be talking about today, is on one side, AI is global. AI is global and regulation is local most of the time. So how do we bridge that gap between global technology and actually I don't think AI is a tool. That's my view of the world, because if AI is a tool, we don't need to regulate it. It's easy stuff, but it's much bigger than actually a tool. So if we have that global stance on technology happening around the world and going fast, so how do we deal with the issue of regulation locally? So for that, I'm going to be joined by my panelists today, and I would like to call Cristal Dubois, Maître Cristal. Cristal Dubois is an attorney in, I think in France. You're based in France? In Switzerland, right? Welcome. Dr. Ming-Kuok Lim from UNESCO, from the regional office in UNESCO. Thank you for joining us. Mr. Anis Boukli, CEO of Digital Partners in Switzerland again. Thank you. So Switzerland today is a guest of this panel. Mr. Abdelali Madani from l'Agence de Développement du Digital in Morocco, head of standardization and regulation. And Mehdi Taher, Mr. Mehdi, from META, and you're head of public policy and META. Thank you, and welcome to the panel. So in order to get started, I'd like to ask each of you to give us a couple of minutes of introduction about where we stand in terms of AI regulation from your perspective. So I'd like to start with you, Dr. Kim, because UNESCO has developed a framework which many countries, I would say almost all the countries around the world has signed. I'd like to ask you about what's the status of that framework, what does it contain, what are the big, and where do we stand in terms of implementation of that framework?
Thank you so much, Mr. Kettani. So I'm Ming-Kuok Lim. I'm with the UNESCO office for the regional office based in Rabat. As Mr. Kettani has rightfully noted, UNESCO is the first organization that created the global recommendation on the ethics of artificial intelligence, adopted by 193 member states back in 2021. I think it remains still the only international instrument regards to AI ethics. In terms of implementation, I would say let's take a good look at the the deployment or the implementation of what we call the Readiness Assessment Methodology, RAM. So it is an assessment that accompanies the ethical guidelines, and it has now been employed, being conducted, being planned in over 50 countries, including 28 in the African continent, 14 in Latin America, and including here in Morocco, which we just recently published, making it only the third country in the Arab region after Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and now in Morocco to have published this readiness assessment methodology. What it means is that these countries, over 50 countries, have taken the time, convene different stakeholders, and to really examine where the country stands in terms of aligning themselves to the recommendations on ethical AI. And this is a very good sign because, yes, UNESCO has the guidelines. EU has its EU Act, and Africa also has recently adopted its own guidelines. But the thing is that where does the country stand in terms of real adoption, real implementation of such broad, global-natured guidelines? This readiness assessment methodology, being employed in over 50 countries, give a good look at the legal framework, at the societal framework, at the economic framework, education, and also on the, of course, the human side of things, the human rights aspect. It's a very comprehensive methodology, and I think it gives a very good impression of where we are right now. Over 50 countries are beginning or in various stages of adopting the guidelines. Back to you.
Thank you so much. Crystal, Maître Crystal Dubois, I'd like to ask you from the EU perspective. EU has signed an AI Act. Can you tell us what is there?
Yeah.
And where do we stand in terms of implementation? Same question.
So, as it was mentioned, so you have the guidelines, you have principles that apply to different countries who ratified these guidelines, and then you have the EU AI Act. So what is the EU AI Act? Is the first AI regulation that applies to all types of AI depending on their level of risk. So the approach taken by the EU is really to regulate AI with regards to how AI is used, so it's about the functionality of AI and the level of risk of such use. So it differs from other types of regulations that don't apply to that.
It's risk-based.
Yeah, exactly. So in the EU AI Act, so you have different level of risk. You have the applications of AI which are prohibited. You have high-risk AI systems, and you have limited AI systems. The regulation also addresses general purpose AI models, so there are different obligations depending on if you provide or deploy an AI system or if you provide an AI model. What is interesting in terms of the EU AI Act is that companies that have to comply with this regulation actually have to ask themselves about how the AI that they are developing or implementing, what is the level of risk that is being developed, or like that is what is the risk, or like what are the utilities of this AI that might cause risk, and I think that's interesting, and that's why the EU AI Act has such a broad impact, because people think more about risk, whereas just developing an AI where you don't think potentially about the end risk of your system. Then you think about how do you stand in the deployment of AI, whether you are the provider of the technology, the deployer of the technology, or the end user. And the EU AI Act also addresses or requires providers, deployers, to comply with certain obligations depending on who they are. So, to answer your question, the EU AI Act has an impact because, first of all, it's the first AI regulations that implements the principle, and secondly, because it helps companies to at least assess the risks of their AI systems and develop or think about AI governance matrix to implement internally. Then we can talk later if it's efficient, if the regulation is addressing all the really important questions, and if it's enforceable for international organizations which are not in Europe, but at least from the point of view of thinking about risks, I think it addresses this question.
Thank you very much, and it brings an interesting perspective on how they see the AI to some extent. I'm just wondering why do we need a law for that, a regulation? I mean, it can be something much easier. But again, we'll have a chance to talk about it. Anis Boukli, you're CEO of Digital Partners. You're coming to us from Switzerland. You have a lot of expertise and experience in, in this space. So my question is, how does Switzerland again foster, AI regulation, and what Switzerland has developed in that space, which we are interested to learn. And we learned this morning that Switzerland is not as advanced in AI, which was interesting. But now let's talk about the regulation part of it.
Good morning, everyone, or should I say good afternoon? Thank you for the question. I think it's an interesting question on the fact that Switzerland, in a certain way, is not part of the EU. At the same time, they are discussing again the fact of being an associate member in order to benefit from different mechanisms that EU has. In terms of regulation frameworks and policy and regulation framework, in fact, Switzerland is really much aligned a lot with the European regulation, apart with certain specific, it is a federal organization, and there is independence between the federal, the states, and even the cities. So basically, I think, they have, the guidance from the federal administration, and then it does decline over the state and the city. If we compare it, I mean, they did adopt different regulations which are similar to the EU Act, but when we talk about the EU Act, most of the time we make the mistake, and I work at the EU level and also at the UN level as an expert, and I'm often in Africa for different reasons, or digital strategies or AI strategies. And basically, EU Act AI Act is also linked with the Digital Single Market, is linked with also with the Data Act, is linked with the GDPR. So there are different mechanisms which are basically correlating in order to absorb the AI impact. That's on one part. Second part, there's also very great frameworks for the whole value chain of scoping, designing, deploying, and this type of technology. I know I've been in Estonia many times because they have worked on very interesting models in Finland also to assess the risk and also including the regulatory aspect of it. When you think about the AI Act, for instance, there are like, and it's interesting because there's like an acceptable risk, which is the first level of this type of risk. That's something like, as an example, the social scoring. But another example where I had to face lately on a global project with WHO, I can tell it now, it's public. So it's misinformation, disinformation, propaganda, which is, if you look at the latest WEF global risk assessment, misinformation, disinformation is one of the killer. And a lot of this technology use AI. So let me give you a concrete example. We were in a tendering, we're a small company comparing to the big one, but we won a global initiative with the World Health Organization. And the objective was to assess whether if the big companies, which is the breast milk substitute industry, were using AI or some techniques or misinformation to sell more to the breast milk substitute milk. And that's a huge market. And these big companies, and especially that I live in Switzerland, I have Nestle close, I have P&G, which is close in Geneva. And that was really interesting because the Lancet journal, which is a reference into the medical, estimate that there's 800,000 kids which are killed every year because of the impact of the breast milk substitute and weakness of not having the mother's inhibitors to many sickness. And basically, so we put together a project we wanted, of course, and which covers 61% of the world population, 17 languages, all the continents, urban and rural zones. And basically, when we produce, of course, we did segment the approach on macro scenario, mezzo scenario, and micro scenario. Micro scenario is really to understand monitoring social media and web, how the mom is influenced. So the first circle of influence is the mom and the friends and family. Second is the retailers and doctors and hospital. And the big pictures is really the retailer. So we did analyze the nature of the messages, the intensity, and something was really funny because we had like Nigeria, we had the US, we had like English. We noted that on the keywords to analyze, when you analyze, you use this type of technology, using multiple type of AI, you recognize object, sentiment, videos, etc. Basically, the semantic of a word in Nigerian is different in the US or in Australia. So you need also to do very specific analysis. And I'll make it short. So we realize, and the report is a shock, that they're using different technique in order to attract people into their own portal in order to influence directly the parent. And the report, I can share it with you if you want the link. It's called a shocking report, demonstrate how this big company used digital marketing and AI in order to benefit while they signed a code of conduct. So that's really, in terms of regulation, when we add this finding, how do you want to regulate that? That was your question, we discussed before the panel. How do you want to regulate these big companies who have like billions to do with this time?
We'll talk about that later. Mr. Madani, I know you represent l'Agence de développement du digital, which is a Moroccan agency. We have in Morocco, we had Minister Rita earlier talking about Morocco 2030 and their intention to have it was an AI strategy in a sense. So where do we stand on what is the Moroccan posture as far as AI regulation? What's happening right now in the country?
Thank you, Mr. Kettani. Thank you for having me in this panel. And at the beginning, I want to stress on the central theme of this panel, which is governance, ethics, and regulation, under the global one, which is innovation and regulation. And I come from a regulator. I have passed and spent a lot of time in regulation. So this topic is very interesting for me. And like we started in, for example, in telecommunication, we had the objective of development the market telecom under a soft regulation, and we open the market and we let the market drive the offers, the services, contribute to the development of the market and the services. So the same thing for AI, for example. We can talk about AI as you mentioned, and as it has been mentioned by Mrs. Mzour, Mzour, the former Minister of Digital Transition. Of course, the AI was one of the transversal pillar of the Digital Morocco 2030. So it has been identified as one of as a cornerstone for implementing, for achieving the implementation of the two axes, which are e-government development and stimulating digital economy by creating the value, creating jobs, and in addition to this, of course, taking into account some challenges concerning the ethics of the AI, concerning what harms the user or the human using, conceiving, developing, deploying, and implementing AI solutions. So this has been identified as a challenge, and I think that the answer came after when the first conference on AI in July the 1st and the 2nd. And one of the challenges was how to, the theme was under a central subject, which is efficient and ethical EI for serving our society. So from the beginning, we take into account these aspects of ethics in developing EI systems and solutions. So, and one of the outcomes of this conference, which we can consider as the components of the roadmap of EI, is to have a strong governance framework for EI, in order, in one hand, to support the potential, or to harness the potential of EI, but also we have to take into account that the citizens shouldn't be, let's say, in some ways, in bad situation, let's say. In addition to this, as our colleague from the UNESCO, Morocco has already adopted the recommendation of EI, ethic EI, and a lot of initiatives have been taken in such what has been realized by, for example, by the CESE, the Economic and Environmental Social Council, some initiative from Morocco to show its leadership toward the region in Africa and the Arab world, by launching this initiative concerning the Digital for Development, for the Sustainable Development Center, and other open the center in UMCSP and other initiatives. Also, I can also mention that in Morocco there is a framework that deals in some extent, let's say, it deals with the regulation of EI in terms of data protection, of intellectual property, of access to information, and other framework that deal with some aspects of EI. Of course, the regulation shouldn't be, or will not be a local one, but it's something concerning all the international markets and the international community. So maybe the standards will play a crucial role in this, in dealing with this issue, and like what is happened and what is pursued, for example, in information security system management. It's the same thing for artificial intelligence system management, which is stated by the standard 2001, and a lot of work is done by the international standards organization like ASU, like EIC, the International Electrotechnical Commission, or by the ITU, the International Telecommunication Union. And in December, an international EI standards summit will be held in Seoul, gathering all the stakeholders, the social society, the civil society, the academia, the government, regulators, and at the top level, in order to discuss this issue and to see how to regulate, but not over-regulate, but regulate with let's say, to smartly regulate, not
smart regulation.
Smart regulate, not one or over regulation, not less, but smart. Do it smartly.
Thank you for that. It's interesting. So we're talking about smart regulation, It's interesting that you mentioned that there is a balance between sort of let's make sure we innovate, but also let's make sure that we regulate what needs to be regulated. You talked about ethics, and you bring something interesting, which is also another dimension, not necessarily regulation and laws, etc., but standards as another way to actually create regulation or technical standards that can be a different move. Mehdi, Meta is probably one of the largest players in the world in terms of AI. Way before this moment of LLMs and so forth, you've been developing AI across your platforms, etc., at various levels. You have probably one of the best engineers and researchers, Jan LeCombe and others in your groups, etc. So my question is, how a global player like yourself is looking at regulation or applying ethical. I don't like the term ethical because I don't know what it means, but ethical ethics to AI as you design, build, and ship products across the world.
Thank you so much. So it's a great question, and it allows me. I just want to take a step back as well, because you mentioned about Meta's history with AI. A lot of people in this room will be thinking, why is Meta involved in AI? You're a social media company. What's that got to do with LLMs and technological development, etc.? Meta is not just a social media company. It is part and parcel of the business, but it's actually a technology company. Meta, back then was Facebook, launched a team called the Fundamental AI Research Team. That team is over 10 years old. So before we even started having these discussions about generative AI and LLMs as we know them today, the team was tinkering away and trying to research how AI can be deployed in various forms. Whether that'll be the apps that you all have on your phones today, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, or through the feed that you see, or Meta AI, which is, I know we said we're not talking about competitors, but like our equivalent of ChatGPT, a chatbot that you can engage with, that's also available on your devices. Or large language modules such as Llama, which we develop and release out into the world as an open source model to democratize access to AI. So whether you're a student in Morocco or a billionaire in Silicon Valley, you have access to the same tools and are able to build on the same products as everybody else across the world. So what does that mean for regulation? What we've seen, and I'm glad we talked about the EUA Act, what we've seen in certain blocks or in certain countries where there was a push to go out and regulate, it's stifled the ecosystem and the development of AI in that region. And that is really, really clear in the EU, where it is falling behind the rest of the world because it decided to go, in one case, not a first mover advantage, but to be an early mover in regulation, and stifled the development of AI. Our position is this: having rules is important, absolutely. There is no denying that the rules have a place, guidelines have a place. But we're also working with a technology that's incredibly fast-paced and moving at incredible speeds. And if you regulate it, and I think that's been a theme both in the first panel and being said now, if you go out and regulate or try and codify how AI should be used or developed or deployed, what you risk is putting into law something that can be immediately outdated and can in itself stay in the statute books that hinders innovation. There is a report by the Linux Foundation that estimates that the MENA region will grow by $320 billion by 2030 as a result of AI. I think that's an incredible figure, an incredible driver of economic growth. But that figure is at risk if countries put forward regulations that don't enable an innovation ecosystem in the AI space. And so our approach is, what we want to have is locally guided, very important, locally guided guardrails, locally guided guidelines that take into account the local context, which is very, very important, but that don't rush into regulations that don't enable the ecosystem to develop. Because you want the next unicorns to come out of Morocco. You want the next unicorns to come out of Africa and the Middle East. And what you don't want is, while some parts of the world are accelerating and taking advantage of this technological development, there are parts of the world that are being left behind because they are constrained by the rules that have maybe been prematurely set on them. I had a roundtable in Egypt just a couple of weeks ago, where it was a combination of government, of academia, of think tanks, of startups. And it's part of our approach of having these conversations so we learn from one another and engage, because we all have different viewpoints. I love that picture of the elephant. I think that's such a great way to look at the AI problem. And one of the things that the startups were all saying, so not a big player like Meta, but the startups, the Egyptian startups in that room were saying, don't regulate. Don't regulate. We want none of it, because you risk holding us back while the rest of the world will accelerate and take advantage of this development. I think AI today is where the App Store was 15 years ago when it first launched. And now we've got billion-dollar companies that didn't exist because before, and then there was an App Store created and a device, a smartphone created that created a whole new industry. We could potentially see the next set of technological revolutions, next set of unicorns, of new industries forming from this region, if we allow it to do so, if we give them the space to do so, if we don't put rules that constrict their ability to innovate and develop.
Mehdi, we will talk to that in a moment, but still, I just want to get a sense about how Meta is applying, I would say, to some extent, self-regulation into, or responsible AI into what you're doing. Because I'm sure you have sort of internal guidelines into your engineering teams and lawyers and governance people. So anything that you can share about how you actually do that would be interesting.
Absolutely. So we do what we call governance end-to-end. So from the very inception of a product, whatever that product might be, to its deployment, we have a multi-stakeholder team that looks at the problem. So we do reviews, risk reviews, we get inputs from engineers, lawyers, policy folks, etc., that look at the problem and try and solve it, like the elephant, from different angles. And then we test. And we ensure that fundamental to what we do is we develop responsibly, whatever the product may be. And we have guidelines specifically on responsible AI development. And so if we take the context of Llama, which was pointed out in the session earlier, our large language open source model, we have guardrails on the model level that prevent it from being abused. These are very, very powerful tools. What you don't want is to create something and then release it into the wild and hope for the best. That's not a responsible way to develop. What you want to do at a system level is to make sure that the guardrails are in place, that if somebody, a bad actor, takes on this model and tries to train it to, for example, create harm, want it to develop the next set of chemical or nuclear or biological weapons, what we do is at a system level prevent that, to make sure that our tools are not abused. Even if they are open source, we still have a responsibility to make sure that they...
So we're applying the risk-based approach that the EU has, to some extent, right?
It's slightly different to what the EU AI Act is trying to do, but I think fundamentally what we're doing is before we just release something into the public, we want to make sure that there are guardrails in place that prevent it from being abused. Whether at the large language foundational model, like I said, because it's open source, people can go and build and fine-tune it in their own way, or at the level of our own chatbot, where you might ask it questions or prompt it in a way that you want to do harm. You know, asking it to create illegal content, asking it to give you instructions on how to create a bomb, asking it how to, for example, put harm onto somebody else. We prevent those, and we have that through a system called red teaming, or actually we call it Purple Llama. So we red team, we have an attack vector. We do that through AI systems, our own internal AI systems. We do it through internal teams, and we get external experts to come in and test it and put different prompts in and push the system as far as we can. And then we also have blue teaming, which is a defensive mechanisms that we put within the system level itself. Together, they're purple. So that's why we call it Purple Llama, our approach to protecting the system.
Thank you very much. So now that we sort of have some sort of perspective about what's going on globally, EU, a couple countries, and I would say a global player, we have different frameworks, we have different approaches. And my question now is really to talk to, are we diverging? Are we converging? Do we have a dilemma of fragmentation of frameworks? Do we need to have them talk together? Do we need to align on that? It's something that I'd like to sort of get from your different perspective. And I'd like to start with you, Dr. Lim. And so can we, I hear different frameworks, but are they interoperable? Are we, do we have a gap there? Do we, as any company, if they want to go to a market, do they have to comply with 5 different frameworks? I mean, I'd like to understand how that really works from your perspective.
Thank you. So the good thing is the big instruments that we have right now, let's say the UNESCO recommendation on AI ethics, the EU AI Act, and even the newly adopted or soon to be adopted African strategy, they are very much in line with each other. Of course, there are differences. The EU AI Act doesn't, the UNESCO global recommendation doesn't have the risk factors, for example, as the EU AI Act, but they do have similarity. For example, the protection of human rights is non-negotiable. So no AI instrument or AI product can be created that harms human rights. They cannot be used for human surveillance, cannot be used for purposes that, as the EU AI Act said, unacceptable risk. So those are very much in line. There's also human oversight that are pretty much in line and with all the major instruments that we have. Human in the loop is a criteria that must be there, and I'm very happy to hear that Meta does have that as well, of course. And the other side of the question is that now we have these global, regional instruments. How can we have the big players, the big tech, use them? The silence in the room. That's a big question.
I have that big question coming later.
We just now we joke about that's the big llama in the room, not the big elephant in the room, but the big llama in the room. So the question I have is also, we have this very nice comprehensive guidelines that, for example, for UNESCO, we developed with like over 10,000 comments from 130, 150 different countries. These represent the desire, the wish, the fear of people around the world when it concerns new technology, when it concerns AI.
So, Dr. Lim,
So how can we have that? You know, like is Meta using this as a training module for their programmers, for their developers? Do all the developers need to go through a session to understand what does it mean to protect human rights? What does it mean to have diversity? What does it mean to protect the environment? What does it mean to have cultural sensitivity? Do we need that? That is a question that I have for a long time.
Just on that specifically, we heard a lot talking, you know, we use the term ethics, etc. Do we have the same definition across countries about that, what the word ethics? Does, you know, ethics means the same in Chile, in Pakistan, in South Africa, and in the US?
I like the way that Professor Maria Rosario Taddeo of Oxford University put it. Ethics is what we should not do because it's bad. It is also similar to what your mother would tell you to do. So I know that this morning we had some very maternalistic comments and examples as well. But just to continue a little bit on that, in general, ethics for us, of course, is a set of guidelines of what not should be done. It is never meant as a way to block creativity. It's never meant to block innovation. This mentality of having guardrails actually has been proven over and over again in children's childhood psychology development. Children are known to work best and excel when they know the clear parameters. Can we transpose this childhood psychology something that has been tested over and over and over again and proved to be correct, can we transpose that to ensure that the parameters are known by new technology, the people developing new technology, so that they can thrive, they can be creative, and they can create new things within the parameter that has been designed and set for them?
It's interesting when I listen to you. I mean, Karim earlier mentioned, and what Jeff had said just this morning, and I was reading a paper yesterday, just to build on what you said, on an experiment that was done in, I think it's in Netherlands, and what they've built is a social network with only agents, no humans, 100% agents, socializing automatically. So they blog and after less than 1 day, all the discussion became about hate and racism and insults, etc. Just 1 day of discussion. So they try to fine-tune it. They spend days to fine-tune, try to avoid that happens. And eventually it may end up being the same result. And they try to understand why is that. And the fundamental reason is they came up with, that was the research, right? Is that there was something really bad in terms of the human data that was used to actually train the model.
I would counter that.
Which come naturally, eventually come naturally after 1 day of the conversation. I'll need to show you that paper. It's very fascinating.
And I will counter that with an MIT paper that develops AI agent based on only limited selected data.
Yeah.
And the result is completely different. But then it comes to this quandary where we have the limited data trained AI agent will not be able to think outside of what is available from the data. But on the other hand, the more general database will inevitably come up with some garbage.
Absolutely.
And then that would taint the results in some way. So there's a bit of a pro and cons there.
Thank you. Christel, I'd like your perspective on this from an EU perspective about,
Yeah, so I'm a Swiss lawyer, so I can give the EU perspective, but I also have the Swiss perspective, just so you know.
Interesting.
To build on what you were saying, you have all the different frameworks and the conventions, and yet we don't have a unique definition about what is trustworthy AI. But we do have principles that apply. So what is trustworthy AI? Because I don't think we've defined it so far. I think you have, so what is in the convention? So you have a trustworthy AI is a human-centric, it's accountable, it needs to be transparent and explainable, and it needs to be privacy-enhanced and secured. So these are the principles that everyone agrees on, even corporates who don't want to comply with regulations. So when we look at all the different, so the EU IA Act, what they did, which I think is a positive outcome of the EU IA Act, is the obligations for providers of AI models. So for instance, for Meta or other players, because now we rely on only a few players and we use the technology, but we don't always know how it has been developed, what are the data, what are the data sources, what are the security, etc. As part of the EU IA Act, you need to be more transparent about how those models were built, what data was used, how to use it, and this then goes down, all the responsibility goes down on the supply chain of the AI. So responsibility is another topic to address, which is not addressed by global regulations, not the EU IA Act. This is a local issue and a local problem that as a lawyer we are dealing with, because of course, who is responsible? Is it the provider of the AI model which developed it initially? Is it the developers here in Morocco who will use the open source model, well, as the terms and conditions of the system or like the models apply? Yes, these are the developers because it's a software, so that's how the liability lies down on the end developer and then on the deployer of such system. So I think there need to be common rules, and this is not addressed by standards, by the way, because standards is how you implement safe measures within an organization. But what needs to be addressed and what is the missing in all these framework is the liability and how to regulate, or how to who is responsible for the defect of AI systems. In the EU, you have the product directive that needs to be implemented by different governments. So it's yet to see, but this EU product directive now applies to AI. So it means that AI providers are considered as manufacturers. So then we consider AI as a product. We don't consider it as so more like a tool. We consider it as a tool, you know. Let's say we reach super intelligence or AGI, as we call it. How do we? So will there be like a constitutional right for AI? No.
Well, AGI will write the constitution.
Exactly. This is something. No. Well, I'm not sure, but to be discussed. I think there are some lack also about IP. We will not talk about this, but the frameworks are good, like for the principles, and then how do you regulate those principles so that it applies to companies who are developing AI, yet you don't want to blur innovation, and you don't want to, you want to stimulate innovation at the same time. So these are very difficult questions that are being raised, but from the practice as a lawyer, this is difficult. And I think it's courts who are dealing with it, local courts, and then we have a very fragmented way of looking at it so far.
Thank you very much, Christelle. Anis, I'd like your perspective on, to some extent, this concept of, because you're in Switzerland, but also you mentioned that you're sort of also, although Switzerland is not part of the EU, you still talk. So how do you see between local and even in your case at the community level up to the EU, how do you see the balance between local stuff and global cooperation in this very space?
Very interesting question, because we're really going towards different layers while implementing. I'm actually expert also at the EU and African Union for the EU and the UN, and we see this different example. I take one concrete example is PRIDA. PRIDA is an initiative by the EU, the African Union, and the ITU, and it's Policy Regulation Initiative for Digital Africa. And what we work there is working on the 54 member states, and supported by the Global Gateway, which is a 300 billion investment in connectivity, digital in Africa, including Morocco, because what used to be DG NEAR, which is the director of NEAR countries, which included Mediterranean, Eastern, and until it goes into the Middle East, became now DG MENA, so covering the whole region. So what was PRIDA role? PRIDA, Policy Regulation Initiative for Digital Africa, is to understand the balance in what you call communities, small ones and big ones. So I was involved with this one, or with SADC, Southern Africa Development Community, which comprised the 16th country of the South of Africa. And when you face a country like South Africa, which is huge, and when I went to Madagascar with local problem, still, lacking a lot of information, I was telling to Christelle yesterday that I went to meet the ministry, but the ministry was just given by the Chinese consulate as to be the ministry. And so you navigate in between big problems to small ones. And for instance, on the regulatory, what they did put, and we did put in place, is model laws. This model laws enables to serve as a model for cybersecurity, for data protection, and enable the countries in order to have a right of bills in terms of data protection, consumer protection, cybersecurity law. And also reinforcing through PRIDA the fact of pushing what they call the Malabo Convention. Malabo Convention is the one who's protecting the data protection, and that Morocco also is signatory, and cybersecurity, which follows the Budapest Convention. And so there are all this type of regulation which reinforce the usage without killing the innovation. That's the right balance. The second point, which is very important, when you address regional, I address, for instance, AI strategy for Senegal, but when you address regional or continental initiative, then you have to face the fact that you need to have balanced approach. So let's take an example. We need to build a security operations center, which monitors all the incidents, the risk, and etc. Do you think that Madagascar can pay on their self-security? It's impossible. So that needs to be regional initiative, which multi-country. Another example, AI Watch. Maybe you heard about this EU program. It's a program, I was leading during 2 years this program. And it's basically landscaping the usage of AI in Europe. So we had all the ministers of Europe on digital and AI. And what we try to understand is to analyze the way the different European countries were using. So what we did put together is a taxonomy which is classified. Which category of function of the governments are we looking at? So it can be education, it can be health, it can be transport, etc. Then what type of AI? Is it regional? Is it national? Is it local? What type of AI? It's recognition, semantic, etc. What public value it brings? So we list the public value. What economic value? What environment value it brings? So we did a classification, I will just make it shorter, to make a trend analysis. That was just after the Brexit, to understand the trends. So UK was the first AI center, which and it was just before. So we needed to understand really the positioning of the EU. The result, to make it short, is that, of course, China and the US are really dominating, not only in terms of users and sector, but IP-wise also. Secondly, is that the northern country of Europe are the best. And what is the first sector that they are covering? Health. Because what they do, they're smart, they're collaborating in between national and regional level. So if I work on oncology, I have put the taxonomy of CODA-Note, which is a taxonomy, because AI does not mean anything without data. So they put together CODA-Notes and test it, for the oncology, and they use it in Finland, in Norway, and etc. So they do exchange based on the regulatory sandbox in order to test the different things. I could develop more, but I think,
Thank you. I would like Mr. Madani to ask you to sort of the same question. So how do you see the role of, for example, Morocco as a country? Should we build our own, path towards regulation, or should we? How do we implement potentially, global standards or global regulations or global laws, or is there a place for both in terms of, we take some of the big things coming from other countries and we do specific things that are to Morocco? I'd like to get a sense about where do you think Morocco should be doing, and it can apply to any country.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Before answering this question, I just want to mention and to add something about when you ask about ethics, what are ethics? Of course, ethics, as we studied in the first year in our law studies, for ethics is a source of the rule of law. But in terms of accountability, when we talk about accountability, then ethics comes to be just something we can do, we cannot do. So it's different from the rule of the law. So when we imagine the solution, the ethics as solution, we already talk about something which ups to who will apply it to respect, not respect, according to different situations. So concerning the path, do we have to take our own path in regulation? I don't think so. I don't think so. We are in we are dealing with a global issue, with an international issue, a topic that involves corporates, involve governments, international standards organization, and it's a global market also. So they thinking that we can have our proper or own path. It's something I think it's something difficult to realize. We have to work within our first to develop our let's say update our frameworks in relation to the issue, which is the AI, in terms of data protection, in terms of data governance, in terms of explaining more, for example, the question which has been asked this morning concerning the sensitive data, for example, because there is a lot of questions that can be solved and can help to have to liberate, let's say, the use of data because AI without data is nothing. So we have already, for example, in terms of open data, we have a portal of open data which can be used as a source of data in order to develop solutions based not only the personal data. When we talk about AI, we directly talk about the personal data. There is other types of data which can be used, not only the personal data. Of course, the path should be inside our continent, as it has been mentioned. These are the African AI strategy, which is aligned with the 2063 agenda, based on and which focus on some sectors, for example, for health, for agriculture, for education, and other. And we can do a lot with our neighbors or our continents. And of course, as you mentioned, for example, the approximation of with the EU acts, like what we have done with the personal data protection, for example, in terms of alignment, and many steps can be reached within the cooperation and the collaboration. As I mentioned before, maybe if we are going more to what I mentioned before, which is the international the EI system management, like what we have for the information system security system with the 27001, for example. So that can be done within our Institute of Standardization, within, of course, with the cooperation, the collaboration with all the stakeholders, the operators, the corporates, the governments, and all the stakeholders which are involved in dealing with this issue.
Thank you very much. Mehdi, how do governments and corporates like your company should be working together to whatever co-design or think globally this issue of regulation, and not having to two different worlds talk together. The reason I'm asking this question is because as we were talking about, what's happening in terms of innovation, etc. So in some sense, I know you guys know your engineers know where this is going in the next 5 years, right? They have a very clear idea in terms of engineering and product design and the capabilities, etc., which you're building to some extent, and which our regulators have no idea about the magic that can happen. So how do you work together to make sure that we benefit to some extent from that innovation, yet not be facing, different regulations in every country in the world, and everybody comes in with his own stuff?
So I'll start off by disagreeing slightly with your last point about saying the regulators don't know where they're going. The regulators are very well versed, as Mr. Madani has rightly stated there about the need to how to handle regulation in a way that creates the enabling environment. But what's the role? It's a very, very good question about what the role is between tech companies, between government, but I'll make it much broader. We've changed it from an elephant to a llama. Thank you, Ming, for doing that. But it is a multi-stakeholder approach. So we go through some principles. First, one size doesn't fit all, right? A law made, we're going to pick a lot on the EU AI, a law made in Europe cannot be copy-pasted all across the world. We know that for a fact. There are local nuances that need to be taken into account, local needs, different challenges, whether it'll be infrastructure challenges, connectivity challenges, etc., cultural challenges that need to be accounted for. So on one hand, it's not one size fits all. On the other hand, what you don't want is complete fragmentation. So as you travel through Africa or the Middle East, what you don't want as a global company or any industry body, or even as a startup trying to break out into the world, is to have to navigate different policies and regulations in every single country. So there's a balance in between. And that balance, I think, can be driven by partnerships between like-minded countries, either geographically or objectively. And we've seen it happen in Africa. The African Union AI Continental Strategy, I think, is a really good example of what a group of nations can achieve if they come together and discuss and try and find common ground to solve the problems that they're facing, because the problems aren't generally unique, and also come up with a solution that is local, that works for the region. The Arab League is doing something very similar with their guiding principles on AI. The part that I'd interject there is, as those discussions are taking place, whether it be the African Union or the Arab League or similar organizations across the world, is the need for consultations. It's very scary if there's an echo chamber between the people that are talking to one another. But if you get different viewpoints, because each person will view that llama differently, each person will have a different objective, each person or entity or organization will want to put forward their objectives or their views. If you have a robust consultative process, then I think the outcomes that come as a result of that is hopefully pro-innovation policies. I think I don't want to focus on the word regulation because that's a tool of policy, but pro-innovation policies that allow countries or regional blocs to meet their objectives of safeguarding its citizens or safeguarding technologies, or we talked before about high-risk national security data, how that type of thing is handled, but at the same time, making sure that their countries, their businesses, their SMEs, their universities are not left behind in what's going to be very much a very intense global competition. There are some things that I think are global, though. I think I just caveat everything that I've just said there, is there are some things that are global where they make sense to be as global standards. An example of that, and it might be quite niche to companies that deal with content generated by AI, but that touches all of our lives. There is an organization called the C2PA. Don't ask me what it stands for. But it's a group of companies, Meta, Google, Microsoft, and others, that have come together to say, how do we deal with labeling or identifying AI-generated content? So the term here is provenance. You want that to be global. You want every single company in the world to be following the same standard, that if content is generated by AI, there is a shared system that is able to identify that this content is generated by AI and label it as such. So there is a role for global standards, but there isn't a role for a one-size-fits-all stamp down policy making, but it's to get together in regional blocks in countries that can work together to ensure that you don't get a fragmented policy ecosystem that will ultimately harm particularly smaller countries. Bigger countries can set sometimes their own standards and their own rules, and companies will have to work their way around it because of the scale or size of the market opportunity. But if countries come together with a shared system of how these policies might be developed in a way that's done consultatively, then global tech companies or like I said, startups that are trying to punch out into the world have much greater clarity about the policy or rule system that they need to follow as they grow or expand into those markets.
So you give me a very interesting, bridge to my next round of questions, which is the hard question, or the elephant in the room, right? Which we haven't talked about, but it's interesting. So how do we? So on one side, I mean, when we look into the tech space of AI, right? They're the big guys, and Meta is one of them, and there's the Googles and the Microsoft and the OpenAI and these kind of companies around the world building LLMs and building AIs and so forth. And they're global by nature. And there are a lot of companies, startups around building healthcare solutions, agriculture solutions, education solutions, a lot of innovation happening there. So how do we regulate in that space? On one side, while we try to make sure that the big guys are complying with the regulations that we sort of build locally or globally, whatever, and at the same time not build regulations that, sorry for using the term, is they don't care about. But eventually what we end up is actually killing our innovation ecosystems locally, because these ones will suffer by the heavy regulation that we impose on locally. So how do we balance between that and make sure that we build the right regulation there? Cristal, you want to start?
So very interesting question. I think what was just said by Mehdi is what should be done. It's really about creating a cooperation between global players which are leading the industry, which have the infrastructure, the energy, etc., and which are really developing the technology forward, and regulators in blocks of countries, of continents that have aligned standards. The second part is really about standards. That's what was said before, and this is how you have a global approach to regulating, or at least keeping, making sure the AI is trustworthy is through standards. It's not through regulation and imposing heavy compliance burdens on small companies. This is totally, I'm totally aligned with your point of view on that. But I think, how do you make Meta or OpenAI comply with the EU AI Act? Well, there are penalties in place and enforcement mechanisms. Are they very scary for such large companies? I'm not sure, but I think maybe it needs to come from society and from individuals about AI and how you think about AI, ethical AI, how you want to use AI in the future. It needs to be, I think it needs to come from this perspective of humanity, of human-centric AI, rather than imposing a very strict cadre, I would say, or like a very strict frameworks that might not be respected and that might be difficult to impose on such big players. Then after we talk about innovation. There are like in the EU AI Act, even though everyone thinks it's a very stringent regulation, and I can agree on some part of it, there are some sandboxes that exist, like regulatory sandbox. You also need to know that there are some exemptions from the Act from all the R&D development that are not yet put into the market, so they are not targeted by the Act. And also, I think the EU Commission, if I keep my EU hat on, they are adapting to the discourse that is saying that the EU AI Act is too contingent, it's too hard on companies and small and medium companies. And I think for small and medium companies, they are also, this needs to be known. I think you have different sets of obligations for large companies and small and medium companies that, even though they have to comply with certain obligations, which are based on the level of risk, they don't have to comply in the same level of obligations that very large companies on which everyone, rely on, and in the end, maybe not dictate, but highly encourage how the technology is developed and how we will be using it in the future. So, yeah, I think it's, to respond to your question, is to really make a differentiation between very large companies that are developing the technology for everyone, and that I think as a user, as a company, you need to know if you input data in such systems, if you fine-tune this model, etc., you need to know how to use them properly. So about transparency, and of course, about users, and of course transparency along the line about what is AI generated in terms of content, because we all need to be informed about this technology, and I think we should be aware of the risk. And as you were saying that AI is among us, or it will be among us, it will dictate how we maybe live in the future, it will make decisions. And the thing is, we don't know. Maybe some labs at Meta or in large companies know, of course, but then shouldn't we know? I mean, shouldn't there be more transparency about this? Like, should we be just be simple users that take in? Companies need to innovate, they need to be more productive. I think in the end there's like a circle that needs to be addressed, and it needs to come from the society, from NGOs, from UNESCO, from such a principle-based framework. So I'm not sure it answers exactly your question, but yeah.
But you give some interesting feedback. I'm not sure that these companies will share with the community what they're doing.
Well, there is a very big open source community now that is working on AI, and I think as well, of course, Llama models, etc. And I think this is, they don't want to share all their proprietary knowledge, of course, but I think if it's towards, humanity and the change of humanity, it should also be a bit more less, a secret in a way.
Okay. Dr. Lim, do we have any sort of mechanism that exists that can enforce, at the global level, global players to comply with the regulation?
First and foremost, UNESCO is not an enforcement agency.
Okay.
Except in very specific cases, for example, when it relates to World Heritage and the such. When it comes to what we have been talking, we are relying on soft laws, we are relying on guidelines, we are relying on standards. And what we do have is, of course, we do request member states to report to UNESCO every so often. But as we have discussed, very big companies sometimes operate internationally outside the bounds of national legal structures sometimes. But on the other hand, we also do propose big companies, regardless, that when they do make a product, it is made in compliance with certain guidelines. It can be a sort of marketing labeling, it can be a sort of PR requirement, but in the end of the day, if a certain product is made in compliance with whether it's the UNESCO recommendation, whether it's the EU guideline, whether it's the African continental AI strategy, it sort of lends credence to the product itself. So in the long run, the consumer will choose a product that is more aligned with standards than not. And that links to the second point. A couple of years ago, UNESCO, 2 years ago, UNESCO launched the UNESCO guidelines on governance of digital platform. I think Meta was there, Google was there. It was during when Twitter became X, so they were not there. And so all the big tech were there, and we did have a discussion on what platform can do in terms of improving governance on digital platform. And what we did agree on was that platforms should be more transparent on how things were made. They should share more information on the important information for the public or the clients to decide, but also on education and awareness. So having the reach that major platform has, there's certainly a room to collaborate and to really improve what we call media information literacy for the users, starting from a very young age all the way to a more matured audience. So that is certainly something we can all do together, because in the end of the day, if the customer doesn't want the product, then no matter what labeling you give to the product, it doesn't matter, or whether it's made by Meta, whether it's made by Google. If the consumer doesn't want it, then it's not going to be very effective. So one of the things that we do suggest is that products that are made in compliance with certain guidelines will be better received in the long run in a higher, more media literate community.
Thank you. I have a question for you, Anis, on how can Switzerland keep innovating and become on top of innovation, while yet thinking through regulation and thinking through AI regulation? How does that can help?
I think if the model of Switzerland can help in the way that it's funny because, you know, whatever you would think about Switzerland, I agree with my colleague Francois, they're not the most innovative country. But what is interesting, in fact, if you take an example of the AI readiness, which is the Oxford Insight Index, which is recognized by everyone, Switzerland is classified 30 number with a lack of vision. So why they are so much innovative? It's really because of the pharmatech industry, where they are a very strong hub, and some companies. That's the reality. But we can benefit from Switzerland's experience being a federated organization on the fact that if you go to Geneva and Lausanne, you're sure that they will not choose the same system just to test. So basically you get diversity and really a lot of experimental approaches. We are not well financed in Switzerland. However, the EPFL, ETH, and all the academic institutions are surrounded by the big giants, Microsoft, IBM, and you can easily test before deploying. So do you get access to Azure for Microsoft for credit of 200K, same with IBM Watson. So there's this level of quality in Switzerland, which is perceived very well. And we can, you know, really test and deploy experimental to a larger. I think we are in a new era where we used to say, let's do everything internally. Now we are moving towards this way of thinking to either an in and outside model. And this is why we work with startup. And this is why the notion of GovTech and digital innovation hubs is arising. What is Digital Innovation Hub? Is a triangulation in between the government, the SMEs, and the academic in order to put together new ways of working. So the reality, I'm the digital sector for Nigeria through the Global Gateway, and it's impressive the money that they are putting. I have to manage 1 billion project just, you know, to put together, and working with GIZ, who's implementing the digital innovation hubs there. Why it is very interesting? Because it upscale the sectorial aspect of the government who needs to give priority. I think this morning we heard that Morocco has a strategy. Well, in the same Oxford Insight, there are 101. And why? Because they're missing the vision. How do they measure the vision? You can have a digital strategy, but you need to have an AI strategy. Oxford Index, you don't have an AI strategy, they downscore it. They're good. They have been very good, Morocco, in infrastructure. We see every year they're getting together, but there are some difficulties of accessing to data. So this type of macro, mezzo, micro indicators are very important in order to prioritize how we should implement the different things. You know, if I have make a metaphor to Simon Sinek, which is the why, the how, and the what. The why is really building the macro, why are you doing it? The mezzo is which step you should act in order, and the what is which technology I should use in order to respond to that issue, to what I'm trying to address. That's what I wanted to say. I've been also working, just the last point, on the AI conceptual framework with GIZ. I was the guy who put in place the framework with the African Union and the EU, financed by EU through the GIZ, and Team Europe and House. What is important today is really to complexity is here, but the nature of the people, at least with the stakeholders I have, is to decomplexify into simple things that let us address what we are trying to achieve. Nigeria, for instance, is very complex, but what we put together is an analysis of the contextual, the country national, and map with what we call finance for digital or finance for AI. So to conclude, there are a lot of opportunities, a lot. There are a lot of financing mechanisms from to address technical assistance. If you need to reinforce a strategy, you do a technical assistance. If you need to reinforce infrastructure, there is branded finance and guarantees, which are true, for instance, the Europe, the EFSD+, which are the instrument and the different mechanisms. There are loans, there are sustainability loans, there are also equities, which are, I'm an expert at EIC, European Innovation Council. They moved from financing startup to enter 3 million without equity to now put together equities in order to invest. And all the zone here have the possibility to build up a project and being financed, but knowing the mechanism. That's the importance. So at the national level, people, or at the regional level, we should benefit from this type of mechanism in order to invest into innovation, AI, and digital. Thank you for the question.
Mr. Madani, last question for you. Morocco is now the host of the D4SD hub, the D4SD hub that was recently signed, and some view it as a way to sort of actually build technology and become sort of a hub to export technology around the world. That can be a vehicle for that. So how can we? Where do you see the role of regulation or AI regulation as support of enabling, startups building technology that eventually help Moroccan companies not only build for local markets but globally?
Yes, the center, the Digital for Sustainability Development Center, which has been launched on the march of the United Nations Assembly,
Yes.
Is a center for digital transformation, but also inside and at the heart of this digital transformation, there is AI as a component of this. And this is a center for to develop sustainability, to develop AI within the concept of sustainability in the region, African and the region Arab. It will be a help for this region. It's like a center for research and the center for development for fostering solution development of AI, and I think that it will be a good opportunity even for Morocco and for the region in order to stimulate this the digital transformation and inside the AI, so that we can, and in our region, we can contribute to the development of the AI ecosystem, not only regionally, but also in terms of the international development of the artificial intelligence. Of course, I can just add one point concerning the compliance, or maybe one of the solutions that can be done. It's that it's to develop such a national AI platforms, so that we can work on local data, for example, and to encourage big tech to work inside the country, using and processing the data locally, and this is either interesting for the startups and the SMEs to have the partnership with this big tech, and also it's an opportunity for the market to be developed, because if we want to enforce the compliance by fines or by sanctions, then we can. I don't think that's we have just to look to the Digital Markets Act or Digital Service Act in Europe and see if this has results for in terms of compliance, and in terms of let's say I don't know, I don't want to say to stop, but just to make it fruitful for all, for the big techs, and for the end user infinity.
It is an invitation for you to have a data center in Morocco, by the way, if you didn't. Last question for you, Mehdi. We tend to focus regulation sometimes on the big guys. Who should be regulated? Should governments be regulated using AI and developing AI? Should other corporations like banks, insurance companies, etc., who are using AI and developing AI, also be regulated? Who really should be? Users should be regulated. Developers should be regulated. What's your perspective on that? Because I know that everybody was looking at you guys, right? But there are others actually are also developing AI or using AI, right?
It's a very loaded question. Ultimately, I guess that the question I will pose to the regulator or the policymakers is, what are you trying to achieve with this regulation? I think, thankfully, most countries gone by the days of bureaucracy of passing laws for the sake of passing laws. It's to achieve a specific objective and to target the individuals or the institutions to help you achieve that objective. But I don't want to sound like a broken record by saying about the importance of not regulating for the sake of regulation, not over-regulating, not stifling that innovation. That comes to the principle, I think, core, and I'm hoping there is general consensus across the world. Yeah, to have policies that address concerns or issues that the government may be concerned about, while also continue to create that space for that innovation. As a global tech company, we've got 4 billion users across the world, 4 billion monthly active users.
Still have 4 billion to
Still have 4 billion to go. 4 billion monthly active users. And that innovation that comes out of Meta and other tech companies, I wanted this to be a Meta-focused conversation, but that innovation helps to really change people's lives, whether it will be keeping you connected with your friends and family through WhatsApp, or the hundreds of millions of people that run small businesses on Instagram and Facebook, or now having chatbots that enable you to be more efficient, to give the student who doesn't have access to all the education facilities in parts of Africa to be able to ask a question to Meta AI or other equivalent chatbots and get that help and support. That innovation helps people's lives and livelihoods. It's a fundamental part, and generally innovation is a fundamental part of economic development. So I urge every single policymaker in Morocco, across Africa, the Middle East, and the world, is to really ask that question: is what problem are you trying to solve for? Is it a case of fear and then rushing because you're scared of what this technology is? Then I think you end up in a situation like Europe, like the EU, where tech companies, Meta and others, have not been able to roll out products in that region because of the EU AI Act, at the detriment of EU citizens. So they do not have access to the same products as citizens of Morocco, because the policy space has not been one that has addressed the risks in the right way or provided guidelines in the right way. So I urge policymakers to think really carefully about what they're trying to achieve and think about the best solution for it. It's not always going to be regulation. It might be in some cases. But are there other mechanisms that we could deploy as a society, as government, to help us achieve the objective that we want to achieve and to learn from the experience of others? I think this is the part of having that collaborative community of nations to learn about what's worked and to also learn from the experience of companies like Meta, like Google, like Microsoft and others that operate globally and have conversations with policymakers all across the world. And we're very happy, as we do in forums such as this, to share our experience.
Thank you very much. I heard few things which I'm trying to summarize to wrap up. Thank you for the last thought, because I think it's really inspiring to what are you trying to regulate? What problems are you trying to solve? You know, why are you doing that? Is the first question to ask, right? Because otherwise, you would be in a hurry to build something which does not fit the purpose, right? The second thing is, I heard is it should be an open conversation, bring all the stakeholders to the table, and build something that serves everybody, not just a point of focus. There are frameworks that exist. We should not reinvent the wheel. We should not build something locally that works only locally. Let's think global, and let's make sure that we use the tools like sandboxing and other mechanisms that exist. And finally, there's something that really was consistent across the board, which I'm really, really happy that we sort of shared that, is that let's make sure that we don't kill innovation as we actually think through regulation. This is really something I heard systematically across the board here, which I'm very happy with. Thank you very much. You can give a word of applause to our panelists. And it's a Khalid, 5 minutes? Okay. Okay. Any questions in the room? We have a question here, and another quantum question here, and the third question here. Okay.
Yeah, thank you so much. You mentioned the possibility of locally guided regulation and consultation. And I was wondering if you could go a bit more into how to make those really representative, because there are increasingly reports of communities from Mexico via Ireland to Malaysia who are experiencing water shortages, energy blackouts, and they were not part in those decision-making processes. So I guess part of the questioning should maybe not only be who owns the AI and whatever benefits come out from it, but also who decides for whom and whose interests are priority in that. Thank you so much.
I'll take the second question, then we take. You have now.
To a question in the question. Do you think that Web 2 is a limitation of natively of the challenge of this panel 2 when you ask about ethics, governance, and the regulation? And my second question. Okay, je vais répondre. Do you think that Web 2 own in his structure natively the limitation of the challenges of the panel in ethics, governance, and the regulation? And my second question, do you think that the decentralization, there are some technology who support protocol that is decentralized using swarm who learn by the collective mesh, and using also the safety by the post-quantum cryptography is one of the key to this. It's the three question of the panel is on the protocol by design, not by the regulator. That's the question. Are you going to wait to to have the regulator to work on these three areas, or to work to have it by design on the protocol, for example, NARES?
Okay, there was a third question.
Thank you for this very interesting panel. Karim Baina, NCS University Mohammed V of Rabat. It's not a question, it's about a remark. You didn't mention trustworthy AI, which is defined explicitly but by EU AI guidelines, meaning lawful AI, ethical AI, and robust technically and societally AI. Ethics from academics point of view, we distinguish between ethics for AI, which is like designing moral AI agents, and the moral aspects is different from Asian countries to African countries to North American countries. Ethics in AI, which means embedding ethics metrics, rules in algorithms, and we are talking about computational ethics or algorithm ethics. And we distinguish the third part, which is ethics of AI, which is the impact of AI on society, citizens, institutions. This is important in defining ethics. And we are talking about, I heard Mr. Boussabat talking about ethics as a catalyst. Ethics can help social and economic development, can help building sovereign countries. It's not a question of choosing Chinese solution or North American solution. It's building local initiatives. I would like to hear your opinion about building data hubs. You told about data centers, but data hubs is much deeper than data centers, with annotated data, qualitative data, with cultural, linguistics, local aspects. We cannot use trained model from Australia to run systems in Africa. And the last intervention is Mr. Ming-Kuok, UNESCO, from UNESCO. You said that each country, it's up to each country to choose either UNESCO framework, European Union framework, or even African framework. But I think ethics, it's not, and governance and regulation, it's not a ready-to-use framework. It's questioning answers, questioning models, questioning data, questioning regulation. Between each regulation or ethics may be very obsolete since technology is evolving every day. Thank you.
Thank you. Any last question? So we have a last question here,
Don't worry.
and then
We're gonna
2 questions here.
give only 1 hour for lunch.
So, okay, so last 2 questions, and then we'll give the floor to the panelists to decide which question you want to answer.
So I'll make it more attractive to get answered. I'm Zachary Belghiti. I'm professor at Mohammed VI University of Health and Science and Mohammed VI Center for Research Innovation in Rabat. I start with Simon Sinek, and Simon Sinek said about the why are we doing the innovation, and in the panel I did not see the responsiveness to the community needs in terms of responding to the health needs or other aspects. And the idea is that in Africa we have less contextualized solution. If you take, for example, the LLMs are built in the north, and many languages that are in Africa are not covered by these LLMs. So the idea is that how to build the capacity of African leadership in building the AI that are sensitive to the key needs of these population. And for my instance, I'll make an advocacy. We're working in healthcare to prevent, for instance, using clinical decision support system to identify, detect high-risk pregnancies. So I'm advocating for any startup working on that to scale up and pilot to reduce the maternal mortality, which is a key challenge in Morocco, which is not in the north, not anymore. So the idea is that to build the innovation. What do you think about the responsiveness and the responsible use of AI in responding to the population needs? Thank you.
Thank you. Last question, and then we'll give the floor to our panelists.
Yeah, so just to stay on the topic of ethics, so my question aligns more on, we talked about ethics, we talked about regulations and AI products and like products that are developed by companies. Like what I'm trying to look for is like, what about things that are developed by the open source community? When we talk about open source, how do we ensure that there's a certain ethical framework that is applied to the open source? You talked earlier that, you know, things, LLMs or models that are developed by, people would go to the models that align more with their ethical standards. But sometimes ethical problems lie in subtle problems, like in some things that is not very obvious, some things that are not very obviously seen or remarked, or are only remarked by some certain minorities. So how do we ensure that the open source community aligns with these ethical frameworks or with these ethics? So that's my question.
Okay, so who wants to start? I mean, you can pick up whatever question you want to address.
If I may, I'll pick up a group of the last two
Okay.
questions as a starter. I think the question about local solutions is an incredibly important one, and it's making sure that communities are not left behind. And that's why, for us, Llama itself being open source is such an important part of that equation, such an important part of that answer. Because it means a model, which if you were to try to develop today in your university or another association tries to develop a model the size of Llama, will cost you tens of billions of dollars to do so, to get the right resources, the computing power, the training data, etc. Meta's done all that and handed it over to the world to use. And we've seen actually some great ideas, great innovations, great products already come out of the region with some of the specific programs that we have to support the ecosystem, including in Morocco. Last year we had Fundamate out of South Africa, which was a personal tutor chatbot built on WhatsApp, helping communities, in particular rural communities, seek support over WhatsApp in terms of personal tuition. We've seen out of Kenya apps or bots developed on Llama that help farmers seek support about their crop and how they develop their crop. We had a competition as well in Morocco last week and in Egypt a couple of weeks ago, where we had great ideas, including a radiology app, where we know there's healthcare shortages across the Middle East and Africa, and using Llama, the AI tool can read your X-rays and have a radiologist online look at the results and confirm the diagnosis of the AI. All of these help, I think, solve for problems that are local to our region, but it involves us, academia, government supporting the ecosystem. So the tools are there, the large language models are there, they're open source for developers to use. And just a fun fact, Llama has been downloaded 1.2 billion times. And there's a combination of tech, industry, academia, and government working together to support that ecosystem, to encourage the development of local solutions to solve for local problems, and to help that innovation come through, building on Llama and other open source or easy to access models. I think that's an incredibly important part to make sure that our region is not left behind in this AI revolution. And on the issue of ethics and open source, as Meta, we have a responsible use guide that accompanies Llama. So when you download Llama, you have to sign up to the responsible use guides, which dictates how Llama should or shouldn't be used. We also, as I said earlier on in the talk, we've got guardrails built into the model itself. But one of the things that we love about it being open source, it means the community will tell us when it's not going right, when there are flaws, when there are gaps, when there are things that we need to address. And we take on that feedback from the developer community. And we see it with the activity on GitHub and other platforms, and how many iterations of Llama there is now on places like Hugging Face, and we work on it. So that continuous engagement that we have with the developer community is an important mechanism for us to address any potential shortcomings, specifically as well that we have those guardrails in place, whether the policies that we set or the hard guardrails onto the model themselves to prevent that misuse.
Yes, I'll try to collect several questions in a single response as well. So obviously, all the UNESCO and even to some extent EU's guidelines are quite global in nature. And when we apply it to a country, we must adapt to the local situations. Our hope is, of course, when the adoption comes, and after the multi-stakeholder consultations, which is the modality of which UNESCO work. We talk to civil society, academia, regulators, private companies, the NGOs. So after all of this consultation comes, our hope is, of course, then they will not just pick and choose the part that they want and forget about some of the more universal values within a ethical guidelines. For example, making sure that human rights are expected, making sure that gender issues are treated, making sure environmental issues are treated. So all of that, of course, we hope they don't just put aside. For example, let's just give some concrete example. Here in Morocco, UNESCO is working with the Supreme Council of Judicial Power to adapt the guidelines into the Moroccan guidelines for usage of use of AI in courts and tribunals. So that is in direct consultation with the judges, the prosecutors, and the Supreme Council of Judicial Power here in Morocco.
So and actually provide technical assistance to do that.
So literally last month, we did a national consultation on this matter. So it is a process that is ongoing. Similarly, in, let's say, Colombia, we are doing that. I believe Colombia would be the first country in the world to adopt and use UNESCO guideline into their national guidelines on the use of AI in courts and tribunal. If Morocco proceed as planned, it should likely be the first in Africa as well, and also in the Arab region to use that. Still a long way to go, but we are progressing. And another way we are doing adapting all of these guidelines into a more local level is, for example, our trainings with journalists. So we also did last year, in 2024, the first training with journalists on how to use AI responsibly in journalism, the first ever in the Arab world and in Morocco. So that in that training, I think we have done 3 now. So we use Perplexity, we use ChatGPT. Forgive me, Mehdi, I haven't used Llama yet. Maybe that's something we can use next time. So this is, again, by using it, we literally talk about how to write prompts, how to do verifications, how to check information, how to do citations, and to understand the limitations and the possibility of using generative AI, and to complement that with the knowledge of what is all of this, the philosophy behind it, the respect for human rights behind it. So that's why we are doing it. It's not just to let them know and learn a new technology, but really, like, through this kind of engagement, we hope that people will organically use it.
Do you want to answer some of the
yeah, so for on the sovereignty part and the open source, I think François already mentioned it, but in Switzerland, very recently in September, so the ETH and EPFL, they issued a large language model called Apertus, which was trained on, 100 languages, and as well specifically for Swiss citizens, because it was trained on French, German, Italian, and Romansh, which are the 4 languages in Switzerland. It was issued, published in a fully, open source way, fully compliant with the EU IA Act. So from a regulatory point of view, it's very positive. Yet, what are the use cases of this model? It's yet to be seen, and I think as it was mentioned, it was not very well received by the community who tested the model, because, of course, it was not as good, potentially, as the Llama models, or as other models which were developed with much more resources than this public-private cooperation, even though it was to build a sovereign AI. So you need to see if it's if the budget that you allocate to these models or like sovereignty efforts are really worth it. I think from an infrastructure point of view, it's more interesting to potentially really invest in AI factories and data centers and energy than to focus on developing very large language models that adapt to your own, or like it could be interesting to fine-tune very large open source model with your language and with, but to be discussed. So that was one point. Another one on decentralization. Is decentralization the answer to address all these different types of global frameworks? Well, not sure. Decentralized infrastructure, potentially, but I work with a lot of blockchain and Web3 projects as well. And the regulations toward Web3 and decentralized or like distributed ledger technology is also very fragmented when you issue a token, etc. So I'm not sure decentralization is the solution to have a global regulatory framework or like a global principles that apply to AI, but it's really, I think it's, as was already mentioned, it comes from principles and users and how it is important to think about the future of humanity and principles in the end.
Anis, you want to add something?
I'll try. A very interesting question, but I'll try to be very concise. First, about ethics. Ethics, I would say, if I want to resume it, because we hear a lot, transparency, explainability, safety, and people do not see the way we should organize this. So for me, ethics is not an accessory. It is the base of building trust. I will give you a very good referential model, which is the Alan Turing Institute model, on which consists of a framework model which is called FAST, fairness, sustainability, accountability, fairness, accountability, sustainability, and transparency. That's the building blocks. Then from these building blocks, it declines in a full transparency map with inputs, with process and output. And this is where you understand the relation in between the ethical justification criteria, ethical permission, towards non-discrimination fairness, towards the safety and public trust, and towards the explicability. So there is a way to organize all of this, because we hear a lot of these keywords without organizing it in a fair way. That's the first point that I wanted to address on ethics. Second, on your point of decentralize. What I see as a trend is not going to decentralize, especially in terms of ministries or at the country level, at the regional level. Take the first building block of AI, of a person, of a citizen. What is it? It's the identity. Identity management, access, authorization, which basically is the building block in any government or any system. The principle that needs to be applied is that if I go to the Ministry of Health and then to the Ministry of Education and I have kids, I should not say give my credential to each of the ministry. I should give it one. And for that, the trend that I see is really federated models, and not in terms federated model, not centralized, not decentralized, but federated model are a way of building the best interoperability. That's very quickly, I'm saying, that's the second point. And the third point was about LLM. A large language model consumes a lot of energy, and that you need to know. What I see as a trend is also moving towards more agile SLM, small language model, with very interesting tools that are being used right now, and customized and less energy this I see as a trend within the innovation ecosystem, and I can tell you I'm exposed to multiple innovation ecosystem. So I made the answer, I hope, short, but that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you. Madani, you want to say, we're good? Great.
Special just in order to let all the audience leave the room happy. Just I think that the question from Dr. Baina concerning the local ethics and the local development of the AI solution, and I just want to remind the audience that recently an MOU has been signed between the ministry and the CNDP in order to develop a national platform, LLM, which take in account the Moroccan cultural and linguistic and cultural and tradition of Morocco in order to develop a national platform which feels with the Moroccan use and the Moroccan let's say culture. That's just to react with your question concerning the question from the Mr. Zakaria Fahim concerning the ethics by design. Just I want just to say that now we have a new job, which is the ethicist inside the corporates and inside the enterprises and inside the job techs in order to align with the standards and to make this solution, the AI systems, ethical, responsible, and that doesn't harm the user in infinity. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And I think it's now to wrap up our panel. Thank you to our panelists, and thank you to the audience. And the floor is yours, Dr. Khalid.